The world of entertainment is a masterclass in illusion. We see the flashing lights, the private jets, the diamond-encrusted watches, and the smiles of icons who seem to have conquered reality itself. We are sold a dream, a narrative of limitless success and untouchable power. But beneath the polished surface of Hollywood's elite, there is often a shadow. And in the case of Sean "Diddy" Combs, that shadow was long, cold, and filled with the silent screams of those who were trapped within it. For decades, he was the king of New York, the architect of Bad Boy Records, the man who shaped the very sound of a generation. He was more than a mogul, he was a gatekeeper. But on March 25, 2024, the illusion didn't just crack. It shattered in front of the entire world. Welcome to Case 404. Today, we peel back the golden curtain to reveal the rotting core of a music empire. This is the beginning of the end. The morning of March 25th began like any other in the wealthy enclaves of Los Angeles and Miami. But as the sun rose over the Holmby Hills mansion in LA and the waterfront estate on Star Island in Miami, the peace was violently interrupted. This was not a standard police visit. This was a massive, coordinated federal operation. Dozens of heavily armed agents from Homeland Security investigations, supported by local law enforcement, descended upon the properties. Helicopters circled overhead, capturing every moment in high definition for the world to see. Agents in tactical gear, carrying battering rams and automatic weapons, breached the perimeters of these sprawling monuments to access. As the world watched the live news feeds, the questions began to circulate like wildfire. Why now? Why Homeland Security? This wasn't about unpaid taxes or minor disputes. Homeland Security deals with human trafficking, cross-border crimes, and the most severe forms of exploitation. The sight of Diddy's sons being handcuffed on the driveway sent a clear message. The untouchable had finally been touched. The investigation, which had been simmering in the shadows for months, had boiled over into a full-scale assault on the Combs empire. But to understand the raid, we have to understand the spark that lit the fuse. For years there had been whispers. Rumors of wild, drug-fueled parties, stories of violent outbursts, and dark tales of coercion that circulated in the VIP sections of nightclubs and the backrooms of recording studios. But whispers carry no weight in a court of law. It took one woman's courage to turn those whispers into a deafening roar. In November 2023, Cassie Ventura, known to the world as Cassie, filed a civil lawsuit that would change everything. The details in Cassie's filing were not just disturbing, they were a roadmap into a private hell. She described a relationship that was not based on love, but on a terrifying cycle of domestic violence, psychological grooming, and forced sexual encounters. She spoke of freak-offs, elaborate, multi-day sexual performances orchestrated by Combs, where victims were allegedly drugged and forced to participate while he watched and recorded. She described being physically assaulted in hotel hallways and living in a constant state of fear, controlled by a man who used his wealth and influence as a weapon of absolute domestic terrorism. Combs and his legal team initially dismissed the claims, settled the lawsuit within 24 hours, and declared his innocence. But the settlement didn't stop the clock, it only accelerated it. The floodgates had opened. One by one, more victims began to step forward. Men and women who had kept their trauma buried for decades felt the sudden, cooling breeze of potential justice. They spoke of a system of silence. A network of employees, bodyguards, and associates who allegedly facilitated Combs' desires and ensured that no one ever spoke a word to the authorities. The federal agents who raided the homes were not just looking for evidence of a crime, they were looking for proof of a lifestyle. And what they found inside those walls would soon become the stuff of internet memes and international horror. During the raids, agents reportedly seized a vast array of electronic devices, phones, laptops, and hard drives, containing hundreds of hours of video footage from the so-called freak-offs. These recordings, allegedly captured by Combs himself, were the ultimate leverage. They were the insurance policy that kept victims silent and high-profile associates compliant. But it was the physical evidence that captured the public's morbid fascination. Federal prosecutors later revealed that agents discovered more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant in the properties, supplies allegedly used for the multi-day freak-offs, that left participants so physically exhausted and drugged that they required 4 fluids to recover. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking. This wasn't a private indulgence. According to the government, this was a criminal enterprise designed to satisfy one man's predatory desires at the expense of countless human lives. As the agents hauled away boxes of evidence, the industry that had celebrated Combs for 30 years suddenly went quiet. The celebrities who had attended his famous white parties, The artists who had signed to his label, and the power players who had sat at his table began to scrub their social media accounts. The fear was palpable. If the feds had the tapes, who else was caught in the frame? The raid on March 25th was a physical manifestation of a psychological shift. The King of New York was no longer presiding over a kingdom. He was sitting in the middle of a crime scene. Yet, even as the evidence mounted, Sean Combs remained defiant. He walked through airports, he posted videos of himself dancing, and he maintained a posture of absolute confidence. He believed, as he always had, that his money and his legacy would protect him. He believed that he was bigger than the law. He didn't realize that the world had changed. In the post-Harvey Weinstein era, the industry of silence was crumbling. The tools of intimidation that worked in the 1990s and 2000s were failing in the digital age. The psychological toll on the victims during this period cannot be overstated. Watching the man who tortured them continue to live a life of luxury while the investigation proceeded was its own form of trauma. But the momentum was unstoppable. Homeland Security was not just looking at domestic violence, they were building a case for racketeering and sex trafficking. They were looking at the transportation of victims across state lines. They were looking at the use of narcotics to facilitate crimes. They were dismantling the very infrastructure of the Combs empire brick by brick. The March 2024 raids were the first act in a tragedy that would span years. It was the moment the world realized that Case 404 was not just a title, but a reality for those who had been lost in Diddy's world. Their stories had been not found for years, deleted by fear and suppressed by power. But the federal government had just hit recover. As we close this first chapter, the mansions stand empty, the lawyers are preparing for war, and the first traces of a Dax Shotley truth are beginning to leak into the public record. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. A piece of video evidence, hidden for years, was about to emerge. A video that would make it impossible for anyone to ever defend Sean Combs again. The empire was built on a lie. The raid provided the proof. But the trial would reveal the monster. In the world of public relations, there is a strategy for everything. You can bury a rumor with a well-timed charity donation. You can silence an accuser with a multi-million-dollar non-disclosure agreement. You can even rewrite history if you have enough influence over the media. For years, Sean Diddy Combs was a master of the narrative. Even after federal agents stormed his mansions in March 2024, he maintained a posture of indignant innocence. He looked into the cameras and told the world that he was a victim of a witch hunt, a target of a government desperate to take down a successful black man. And for a brief moment, some believed him. But in May 2024, the narrative didn't just collapse. It was vaporized by a grainy, silent video from a hotel hallway. Today, Case 404 examines the moment the world saw the monster behind the mogul. This is the smoking gun. The footage originated from the InterContinental Hotel in Century City, Los Angeles. The date was March 5, 2016. For 8 years, this video had been hidden, allegedly suppressed or bought by Combs to ensure it never saw the light of day. But when CNN broadcasted the surveillance footage to millions of viewers, the collective gasp of the public was audible across the globe. The video was short, silent, and utterly devastating. It shows Cassie Ventura, Cassie, attempting to flee a hotel room. She is dressed in a tracksuit, carrying luggage, trying to reach the elevator to escape a nightmare. Then the door bursts open. Sean Combs emerges, wearing nothing but a white towel wrapped around his waist. He is not the suave billionaire we see on the red carpet. He is a predator in a fit of primal, uncontrollable rage. He sprints down the hallway, catches Cassie by the back of the head, and slams her to the ground with a violence that is sickening to watch. As she lies defenseless on the carpet, he kicks her. He grabs her by her clothing and drags her back toward the room like a piece of inanimate property. Later in the footage, he is seen throwing a glass vase at her. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a complicated relationship. This was a brutal, one-sided assault captured in cold, unblinking high definition. The psychological impact of this video on the public cannot be overstated. It provided a visual confirmation of every horrific detail Cassie had included in her lawsuit. It proved that Diddy was not just a powerful man with a temper. He was a man who used physical terror to maintain absolute control over those he claimed to love. The fallout was immediate. The defiance that Combs had shown after the federal raids evaporated. Within 48 hours, he posted a somber, curated apology video on Instagram. He looked tired, he spoke in a low voice, and he claimed he was truly sorry and had sought professional help. But it was too late. The world had seen the towel. The world had seen the kick. The world had seen the dragging. The industry of silence had been shattered beyond repair. As the public focused on the hotel video, the federal government was quietly finalizing a much larger, much darker case. On September 16, 2024, the hammer finally dropped. In a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, federal agents arrested Sean "Diddy" Combs. The King of New York was taken into custody not with a bang, but with a cold click of handcuffs in a quiet lobby. The next day, the indictment was unsealed, and the true scale of Case 404 was revealed to a horrified public. This was not just a case about a hotel assault. This was a RICO case, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The government alleged that Combs had spent 30 years building a criminal enterprise. According to federal prosecutors, his businesses, Combs Global, Bad Boy Records, and his various lifestyle brands, were not just companies, they were tools used to facilitate sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, and bribery. The indictment focused heavily on the freak-offs. Prosecutors described these events as highly orchestrated, multi-day sexual performances that Diddy directed from the sidelines. But the most chilling detail was the element of coercion. The government alleged that Combs used his vast power to lure victims into these scenarios, often using narcotics like ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB to keep them compliant and submissive. These were not parties, they were marathons of exploitation. Victims were reportedly forced to perform for days at a time, often requiring 4 fluids to recover from the physical exhaustion and drug-induced stupor. And then there were the cameras. Diddy allegedly recorded these freak-offs without the consent of the participants. These videos were the ultimate weapon of control. In the high-stakes world of Hollywood and the music industry, a video like that is a death sentence for a career. The government alleged that Combs used these recordings as collateral, blackmail to ensure that no one ever went to the police, no one ever spoke to the press, and everyone remained within his orbit of influence. The indictment also revealed a support staff of sin. It wasn't just Diddy. The government claimed that his personal assistants, his security detail, and his household staff were all part of the enterprise. They booked the hotel rooms, they filled the 1,000 bottles of baby oil, they procured the drugs, and they acted as the cleanup crew after the violence occurred. They were the invisible infrastructure that allowed a predator to operate in plain sight for 3 decades. Diddy's legal team, led by some of the most expensive attorneys in the country, argued for bail. Diddy offered $50 million. Onlar Diddy'nin pasportini tapshirishini, Wydenchik misligini va harkande alakani uzishini vieta kilishti. But the judge looked at the evidence, the history of witness intimidation, the vast wealth that could facilitate a flight from justice, and the violent nature of the charges, and delivered a decision that sent shockwaves through the industry. Bail denied. For the first time in his adult life, Sean "Diddy" Combs was not sleeping on 500 thread-count silk sheets in a Star Island mansion. He was processed into the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn, a facility notorious for its violence, its filth, and its dangerous conditions. The man who had once been the ultimate symbol of American luxury was now just federal inmate number 37452-054. Inside the MDC, the psychological collapse began. Reports leaked out of the prison describing a man who was paranoid, refusing to eat for fear of being poisoned, and struggling to adapt to a world where his name carried no power. The gatekeeper was now the one behind the gate. But as Diddy sat in his cell, the case outside was growing at an exponential rate. In October 2024, a high-profile attorney named Tony Busby held a press conference that redefined the scope of the scandal. He announced that he was representing over 100 additional victims, men and women who were ready to file civil lawsuits against Combs. The allegations spanned decades, dating back to the early 1990s. Some victims were as young as 9 years old at the time of the alleged abuse. The Diddy file was no longer just about one man's crimes. It had become a systemic exposé of the music industry's darkest habits. People began to look back at old interviews, old music videos, and old award show appearances with a new, horrified perspective. The jokes about Diddy parties that had circulated for years were no longer funny. They were evidence of a collective failure to protect the vulnerable. As we conclude this second chapter, the evidence is overwhelming. The king is in a cage, and the industry of silence is being replaced by a chorus of voices demanding justice. But the most terrifying question remains: who else was in the room? The tapes seized by the FBI contain the faces of some of the most powerful people in the world. As the trial date approaches, the entire entertainment industry is holding its breath. Because in the world of Case 404, when you find one monster, you usually find a nest. And the nest is about to be set on fire. For 3 decades, the name Sean "Diddy" Combs was synonymous with the American dream. He was the man who had it all: the talent, the wealth, the influence, and a seat at the highest tables of global power. He was a kingmaker, a gatekeeper, and a symbol of black excellence that seemed untouchable. But as the year 2026 dawns, that dream has completed its transformation into a permanent, waking nightmare. The ivory towers of Star Island and Holmby Hills have been replaced by the reinforced steel and concrete silence of the Metropolitan Detention Center. The music has stopped, the parties are over, and the only sound remaining is the relentless ticking of a legal clock. Today, Case 404 reaches the final chapter of the Combs empire. This is the reckoning. As the federal trial approaches, the world is witnessing a legal battle of unprecedented proportions. This is not just a criminal case, it is a cultural autopsy. Federal prosecutors have spent years meticulously assembling a digital and physical mosaic of a criminal enterprise. They have the hard drives, they have the 1,000 bottles of baby oil, and most importantly, they have the voices of over 120 victims who are no longer afraid to speak. But as the courtroom doors prepare to swing open, a new and more terrifying shadow has fallen over the entire entertainment industry. It is the shadow of the tapes. During the raids in early 2024, Homeland Security seized hundreds of hours of video footage from Diddy's private residences. These were the recordings of the freak-offs, sessions that the government alleges were marathons of drug-fueled exploitation and coerced sexual acts. But the horror of these tapes is not just in what they show Diddy doing, it's in who else is in the frame. For years, the most powerful people in Hollywood, the music industry, and even politics attended Diddy's parties. They smiled for the cameras, they drank his expensive vodka, and they basked in his aura of invincibility. Now, as the government begins to process the footage, a wave of pure, unadulterated panic has gripped the elite. In the high-stakes world of celebrity, silence is often bought with a price. But the federal government does not accept NDAs. Every person captured on those tapes, whether they were participants, observers, or facilitators, is now a potential target or a witness. We are seeing a massive, systemic scrubbing of history. High-profile celebrities are deleting old photos, distancing themselves from their former mentor, and hiring the most expensive crisis management teams money can buy. The industry of silence is being replaced by an industry of fear. Everyone is asking the same question: who is on the hard drives? But while the elites panic, the victims are finally finding their breath. The legal team led by Tony Busby has brought forward stories that are so consistent in their horror that they are impossible to ignore. They speak of a grooming process that was as sophisticated as it was predatory. Aspiring artists, young models, and even ordinary people looking for a break in the industry were allegedly lured into Diddy's inner circle with promises of fame and mentorship. Once inside, the trap snapped shut. They were introduced to drugs, isolated from their families, and forced into scenarios that shattered their psyches. The psychological blueprint of the Combs enterprise was based on a simple, ancient principle: leverage. If you have a video of someone at their most vulnerable, their most drugged, or their most compromised, you own them. This was not just a sexual preference, it was a mechanism of absolute power. The government alleges that Combs used these recordings as a form of digital blackmail to ensure that his kingdom remained secure. He didn't just want pleasure, he wanted a collateral that would prevent anyone from ever betraying him. Now, sitting in his small cell in Brooklyn, the man who once controlled the winds of culture is experiencing the absolute loss of control. The Metropolitan Detention Center is not a place for moguls. It is a facility defined by its brutality, a place of frequent lockdowns, violent encounters, and crushing isolation. Reports from within the prison suggest a man who is a shadow of his former self. He is no longer the confident commander of Bad Boy Records. He is a defendant facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. His legal defense remains aggressive. His attorneys argue that the freak-offs were consensual acts between adults, that the drugs were part of a high-stakes lifestyle, and that the government is overreaching in its attempt to criminalize private behavior. They point to his legacy, his contributions to the community, and his role as a father. But the weight of the evidence, the sheer volume of consistent testimony from unrelated victims spanning 30 years, creates a prosecutorial mountain that seems impossible to climb. The Combs case has become the Me Too movement's second, more focused wave. If Harvey Weinstein was the monster of the film industry, Diddy has become the symbol of a rot that exists at the core of the music world. It has forced a global conversation about the power of gatekeepers and the culture of enabling. How many people saw the bruises? How many hotel staff members cleaned up the blood? How many assistants booked the flights for victims who were clearly in distress? The case is exposing this support staff of sin, the network of enablers who prioritize their paychecks over human life. As we look toward the final verdict, the impact of Case 404, the fall of an empire is already clear. The era of the untouchable mogul is dead. The tools of intimidation that worked for 3 decades, the wealth, the lawyers, the celebrity connections, have failed in the face of federal law and a public that is no longer willing to look away. For the victims, justice is a slow, painful process. No court verdict can erase the trauma of those hotel rooms. No prison sentence can restore the years lost to fear. But the felling of this empire provides something that was once thought impossible: the truth. The 4,500 words we have spoken in this series are more than just a script. They are a record of a tragedy that was allowed to happen in plain sight. Sean Diddy Combs once said, "I'm a survivor. I'm gonna keep on pushing." But this time there is nowhere left to push. The walls have closed in. The gate is locked. And the empire has turned to ash. As we close this file, we are reminded that power without accountability is a weapon. And when that weapon is turned against the innocent, the fallout is catastrophic. The Case 404 of the music industry has finally been found. It was hidden in the lyrics, it was hidden in the parties, and it was hidden in the silence of those who knew better. The king is gone. The palace is a crime scene. And the world is finally, painfully awake.